Tonight, we're very pleased to kick off our very first of our weekly conversations with the folks staffing our new Ontario hubs. We'll touch base with stories from the hubs every Friday night, and joining us now for that, from our studio at Confederation College in Thunder Bay, Ontario, TVO's John Thompson in our Northwestern Ontario hub, and via Skype at Western University in London, Ontario, TVO's Mary Baxter in our Southwestern Ontario hub. And we're really glad to have you two on the agenda tonight. This is an opportunity for you to tell us some stories from parts of the province that don't necessarily get into the Toronto dailies or the Ottawa daily newspapers, but experiences that are shared across the province. So, John, you sit tight for a second, because I'm going to start with Mary and something that she's been writing about taking place in Southwestern Ontario. I want to know more about these neighborhood associations that you see sprinkling up. Mary, what's the story there?
Well, yes, Steve, it's really interesting what's going on. Over the past year and a half or so, we've seen in London here alone the addition of about 9 neighborhood associations. There's about 34 associations in the city, so 9 of those within the past year and a half have formed, which is really quite amazing. But it's not just here in London, it's also in Chatham and in Windsor. We're seeing new associations form there too.
And these are just local residents who are getting together because some issue provokes their interest. What do you attribute to the newfound interest in creating these associations?
Yeah, I was really scratching my head about that. So I talked to Lee Levesque, who's a political science professor at the University of Guelph, and she was talking about how just generally in society we've got more expectations around citizen engagement, and there's a lot of different factors that are kind of building that up. There's an expectation about individuality that comes from being able to use things like social media, and that's politicians. We all know now how to reach our politicians in many different ways, for instance. And the same thing for municipalities. They want to reach out and engage their citizens in as much as they can. And they're really eager often to see these neighborhood associations form.
Now, do these associations have any power?
No, they don't. Actually, I spoke to another researcher. His name is Zachary Spicer. He's a senior policy associate with the University of Toronto. And he was looking at community councils that were an idea that was floated around amalgamation times in the early 2000s in larger cities. And some of those councils, 2 of those councils still exist, and they're kind of like larger neighborhood associations. They're formal, and the vision there was to give them some small powers, things like um, maybe establishing stop signs, where to put them, or crosswalks, things like that. But they, for the most part, have kind of fallen off for different reasons. One being councillors have don't really want to be giving those kinds of powers to places that could be training grounds for their rivals.
Well, I remember that was one of the big compromises when they created the megacity here in Toronto. The idea being that, the local voice might be lost if a big mega council were created. So that's why they created those sort of neighborhood councils. But your riding associations are sort of the ones you've been focusing on, are much more fluid things. And I wonder whether, much less structured, I guess, than these neighborhood councils. I wonder whether everybody agrees that they are unambiguously good things to be created in such large numbers.
No, there's a few questions out there. A lot of people are really positive about them for sure, but they offer some words of caution, because what can happen is that neighborhood associations can become like exclusive little cliques almost, and in some cases they might not give voice to the people in their neighborhoods that most need a voice. In other cases, what can happen is that municipalities can actually control the conversation, and with neighborhood associations, kind of I diffuse maybe discussions around more controversial topics by going through the associations.
Well, I guess there's also situations where politicians feel they need to kowtow to some associations, some of whom, may sit once a year and half a dozen people show up for the meetings, and, the influence is really quite overblown. I guess that happens too, doesn't it?
One would think, yes, for sure.
Yeah. Mary, let me get you to touch. So I know you've had a first part on that on the website already, tvo.org. You've got a second part coming out on these associations sometime next week. So we'll give people the heads up on that. You also did a piece for the website on high-speed rail, which has been promised 1,000 times in 100 different incarnations over the past 50 years. Any update on that story?
Yeah, actually, it's kind of interesting. One of the challenges that people are seeing in that is that they want more frequent service rather than high speed. And you're seeing that in smaller communities. That was in my story last week. Well, now Sarnia's mayor, Mike Bradley, is also talking about the importance of having more frequent rail service. And actually, on Wednesday, he told the Free Press, their reporter there, Megan Stacey, that Queen's Park is trying to impose all sorts of things on this region. And I think that people are just reaching a tipping point. Maybe one of the things he might have had in mind, it's not a provincial initiative, but it's certainly one where people are also concerned, is the federal announcement earlier this month with the Ambassador Bridge being replaced. The bridge is owned by billionaire Matty Maroon, and he didn't there was no consultation in the decision making for the decision surrounding this bridge. It's going to be 6 lanes. The original is, I can't remember if it's 2 lanes each way, but it's definitely going to be significantly larger. And I spoke to Windsor West MP Brian Mass on Thursday, uh, just to see kind of what he felt were the issues about it. And it sounded like people were talking about that the same way that people in rural areas are talking about high-speed rail, just kind of wondering what's it going to do to their lives and to their communities, and not necessarily in a good way. And he thinks that the Liberals, both at the provincial level and at the federal level, are actually missing an opportunity to start discussing planning in these areas. So, for instance, it's a good time to start talking about how to protect farmland and rural communities with talking with high-speed rail. And then in Windsor, of course, how to boost things like improve border security or border crossings and the communities that surround the bridge.
Okay, Mary, thanks for that view from southwestern Ontario. Let's now bring John Thompson from northwestern Ontario and our hub in Thunder Bay into the discussion now. John, a rather hard turn here. We've got to talk about a most distressing story. 7 Indigenous young people found dead in Thunder Bay River since the year 2000. What do we need to know about this crisis?
Well, the word crisis has been defining the summer of 2017 in Thunder Bay. What we've done on tvo.org is we've divided those stories into 2. The first part was before the city itself admitted that it was in crisis, and the second is what has happened since.
And let's pick up on that. What has happened since to potentially make things safer for Indigenous students in northwestern Ontario?
Well, within 11 days in May, the bodies of Tammy Kiash and Josiah Begg were discovered. And once again, those were deemed to have been not suspicious deaths. This coincided with a loss of faith in the public, in the institutions of the police and the municipality. And it was really a mass movement that you could call a crisis that developed. The families really led kind of this moment of civil rights in Thunder Bay history. And so from the moment it was deemed a crisis, there were a series of things that seemed to be at play. Most of those things didn't happen. So our MP, Don Rusnak, said that there was going to be a reconciliation summit. No meeting was ever held for that. When the city identified it as a crisis on August 1st, standing with Anishinaabe Nation and Fort William First Nation, it said it was going to develop student plans for safety with those organizations, and no meeting was ever held.
Wasn't there some kind of confrontation between the mayor and the police?
Well, there's 2 civilian investigations going on into the Thunder Bay Police Service and its board, one of which is being led by Murray Sinclair, which you'll remember from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Now a senator.
Yes. The mayor and the police chief have both been arrested under an RCMP investigation. The police chief was for obstruction, the mayor was for obstruction and allegedly extorting a lawyer named Sandy Zaitsev.
Now, this is one of the reasons why we wanted to set up these hubs. I mean, that's a story that has just not percolated a lot south of the French River, but a mayor getting arrested, I think, is a big deal. There's a school at the center of all of this, John, called the Dennis Franklin Cromartie High School. And it's kind of a key part of the story. Help us understand that angle.
Yes, many of the students whose bodies have been discovered in the river were attending, they call it DFC in Thunder Bay, and that school exists, it's all Indigenous school. It exists because there is no secondary education in the First Nations of the far north. So those students all have to come to Thunder Bay at the age of 14 years old, experiencing a great deal of culture shock to come to a city of 100,000 people from places in some cases that have 2 dirt roads and everybody knows everybody.
And what's happened to enrollment at DFC so far this year?
This year, it's dropped to just over half of what it was last year. And so imagine yourself being a parent in a remote community. You have absolutely no choice but to send your child away to receive secondary education. And you are in a situation where Thunder Bay has this reputation that it has developed. And you're watching as these organizations are moving as fast as government does, but you need to make decisions about where your kid is going to go for school.
John, do you have any idea whether or not the population of the school has declined because those students have simply dropped out of school, or are they not being allowed to leave home now, or what's the story?
According to Deputy Grand Chief Derek Fox of Anishinaabe-Aski Nation, he is not aware of any single child who is not enrolled somehow in education. There was a fear that parents were going to just pull their kids out of the education system entirely. And that fear was very real, and that's really important because education is a right and because it is a major indicator of how successful you will be in life. So the Keewatin-Patricia School Board to the west in the Kenora District is receiving some students. There are some who are going to as far as southern Ontario. And there are a couple of families who are going to Onigaming, which is in Treaty 3, a community, a First Nation there, that has a K-12 school. And I talked to the chief out there, and she told me that she, in the 1970s, had to go to Fort Frances. And it was a very similar situation in that there were 12 people who went with her, and about 4 or 5 of them made it through the years. So that was the 70s, and we're still doing this now.
I want people down south to have a better appreciation and understanding of the fact. How far are some people having to travel when they leave home at the age of 14 to go to secondary school?
Well, most of the communities are remote, so you're flying into Thunder Bay, but you're looking at 600 kilometers. You're not seeing your family for several months, and that's extremely unique. Any 14-year-old would be deeply impacted by that, but you're also moving to a city, and in a lot of cases not being boarded with families who are familiar with your culture. And so that can be a challenging adaptation for a lot of students. And what's really interesting, I think, is that it's dividing, the young people are dividing into people who are saying that they don't want to be in Thunder Bay because they're concerned about their safety, or they want to be in Thunder Bay. And a lot of young people really like Thunder Bay or believe they can handle Thunder Bay or get through it. And I think that's a really interesting thing when you talk to young people.
Indeed. And we thank you for bringing it to our attention. That's John Thompson, our Northwestern Ontario Hub Captain, and Mary Baxter from our Southwestern Ontario Hub Captain. They were in Thunder Bay and London, Ontario, respectively. Thanks a lot, you two, and we'll talk to you again a week from today.
Thanks, Steve.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.